I need you to hear something that's going to make you uncomfortable. The smartest person you know, the one who reads everything, who always has the right answer, who can see 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still figuring out the board. That person is probably losing. And they can't figure out why. You know exactly who I'm talking about. The brilliant friend who can't get promoted, while some guy who can barely string together a coherent email somehow keeps climbing. The straight-A student who's now working for the C student dropout. The chess player who keeps losing to someone who's basically playing checkers. You've seen this. You've maybe lived it. And the explanation you've been given, life isn't fair, that's not an explanation. That's a surrender. 500 years ago, a man named Niccolo Machiavelli watched this exact pattern play out across the courts and battlefields of Renaissance Italy. He watched brilliant advisors get destroyed by men half as smart. He watched careful strategists lose to reckless gamblers. And he didn't shrug and say, "Life isn't fair." He sat down and wrote exactly why it happens. He documented the actual mechanics. And what he found, what he left for us in a book most people have heard of, but almost nobody has actually read, is one of the most dangerous insights ever committed to paper. This isn't about being dumb. It's about understanding that the game you think you're playing, the one where the best ideas win, where merit gets rewarded, where intelligence is the highest currency, that game doesn't exist. It never did. Machiavelli saw the real game. And today, I'm going to show it to you. Let's start with the lie you were told before you were old enough to question it. From the time you were 5 years old, you were trained inside a system that had one rule. Know the right answer, get the reward. Raise your hand. Get it right. Gold star. Good grades. Good college. Good life. Intelligence equals success. That was the deal. Here's what nobody tells you. School was the last environment where that was true, the very last one. After that, the rules changed completely. And nobody, not your parents, not your teachers, not your guidance counselor, nobody sent you the memo. You walked out of that system believing the world runs on logic and merit, and you stepped into a world that runs on something else entirely. It runs on human nature. And human nature does not care how smart you are. Machiavelli saw this with brutal clarity. In chapter 15 of The Prince, he wrote something that should be carved into the desk of every intelligent person who can't figure out why they keep losing. He said that a man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil. Now, he's not talking about virtue in the moral sense. Not exactly. He's talking about anyone who operates by the way things should work instead of the way things actually work. The person who follows the rules in a room full of people who don't. The person who believes the best argument should win the meeting, while someone else is winning the meeting by reading the room, managing perception, and making the decision-maker feel smart. Here's the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Smart people see complexity. Where an average person sees 2 variables, the genius sees 10. Where someone else sees a simple opportunity, the genius sees 14 reasons it could go wrong and starts building contingency models for each one. And while the genius is mapping the problem, the other person, the one the genius would never trade IQs with, is already moving. The genius builds a perfect mental model. The other guy builds a business. The genius refines his theory. The other guy refines his pitch. Same starting point, completely different outcomes. Not because the other guy was right, because the other guy moved. Think about BlackBerry and Apple. BlackBerry's engineers were genuinely brilliant. They understood mobile computing at a deeper technical level than anyone at Apple did at the time. They analyzed the market. I identified that enterprise users needed physical keyboards and robust security, and they were correct. Their analysis was accurate for the world as it existed. But Apple didn't analyze the existing world. Apple moved to create a new one. The less technically rigorous approach won, not because it was better engineering, but because it prioritized speed and perception, and the willingness to be wrong over the need to be right. Machiavelli wouldn't have been surprised by this for a second. So, if intelligence isn't the advantage we've been told it is, what is? Machiavelli had a word for it. He called it virtù. And I need you to hear this carefully because it's not what you think. Virtù has nothing to do with virtue in the way we use that word. Virtù is force. It's energy. It's the capacity to impose your will on circumstances before circumstances impose their will on you. It's not about being smart. It's about being effective. And those are two very different things. Machiavelli compared fortune, meaning the circumstances you find yourself in, the way the world breaks around you. He compared it to a violent river. When it floods, it destroys everything. But the people who built dikes and channels before the flood, the people who prepared the terrain, they redirected it. They used the force of the river instead of being swept away by it. Now here's the key. The genius studies the river. He maps its currents. He builds mathematical models of flow patterns. The strategist builds the dike. And by the time the genius has a complete hydrological model, the strategist's house is already on high ground. Chapter 25 of The Prince, and this is the part that changes everything. Machiavelli writes that if someone governs himself with caution and patience, and the times happen to align with that approach, he'll succeed. But, and here's the knife, a man is not often found sufficiently clever to know how to change when the times change. The cautious man, when it is time to turn adventurous, does not know how to do it. And so, he is ruined. Read that again in your head. He is ruined. Not inconvenienced, not set back. Ruined. Because he locked himself into one way of operating, and the world shifted under his feet. This is why the so-called idiot beats the genius. The genius develops a framework and commits to it because the framework is brilliant. It is. It genuinely is. And that commitment becomes a cage. The person who never built a framework, who never had the intellectual architecture to get attached to, can pivot without friction. They don't feel the pain of abandoning a model they spent months building. They don't have sunk cost in being right. They just move to where the opportunity is. And Machiavelli watched this happen over and over and over in the Italian courts. Brilliant, cautious leaders destroyed by reckless ones. Not because recklessness is a virtue, but because speed in a changing environment is worth more than perfection in a static one. And the environment is never static. Let me make this concrete. Your company announces a reorganization, new leadership, new structure. Everything's in flux. The genius thinks, I need to understand the full implications. Who gains power? What does this mean for my department's budget? And let me map the stakeholder interests and build a strategic response. Meanwhile, the guy 2 cubicles over, the one the genius has always quietly looked down on, walks directly to the new VP's office on day 1, introduces himself, volunteers for the transition team, asks how he can help. By the time the genius finishes his analysis, the other guy has personal relationships with every decision-maker in the new structure. The genius has a document. You tell me who's positioned better. This shows up everywhere. Dating, social situations. The genius overthinks the approach, runs simulations in his head, worries about saying the wrong thing, analyzes social cues. Meanwhile, the person with less analysis running, less noise between impulse and action, just walks up and starts talking. And because confidence reads as competence, because the world evaluates you on what it sees and not on what's happening inside your head, That person is already ahead before the genius has finished deciding whether to make a move. Machiavelli said it plainly. It is better to be impetuous than cautious. Fortune allows herself to be conquered by men who are bold rather than by those who proceed coldly. He's not romanticizing recklessness. He's making a statement about how the world actually distributes outcomes. The person who acts, even imperfectly, even messily, captures opportunities that the careful person doesn't even know existed yet, because those opportunities only reveal themselves through action. But speed alone isn't enough. The second reason this happens is even more uncomfortable, and it has to do with how the world actually evaluates you. Chapter 18 of The Prince. This is Machiavelli at his most surgical. He writes that men in general judge more by the sense of sight than by the sense of touch, because everyone can see, but few can test by feeling. Everyone sees what you seem to be. Few know what you really are, and those few do not dare take a stand against the general opinion. Let that settle for a second. He's saying that your actual substance, your real intelligence, your genuine competence, the quality of your thinking, almost nobody can evaluate that directly. What they evaluate is what they see. Your visible behavior, your communicated results, your managed reputation, and even the rare person who can see through to your actual substance won't contradict the crowd's perception. The consensus wins. Always. This is why smart people lose this game. They have a fatal assumption baked into their operating system. The world should reward substance. My work should speak for itself. My ideas should win on merit. My competence should be obvious to anyone paying attention. Should. Machiavelli would call this delusional, not because substance doesn't matter, it does, but because substance without visibility is invisible, and invisible doesn't win. The person with less raw intelligence, but more social awareness understands something the genius doesn't. You have to show people what to see. They're not smarter, they're more visible. They talk about their wins. They frame their contributions in language that matters to the people making decisions. They manage their reputation like it's a product, because it is. The genius waits to be discovered. The strategist makes discovery inevitable. Machiavelli laid out the framework for this with his fox and lion metaphor. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. The genius is all lion, pure raw capability. But a lion that can't spot a trap walks right into one. The strategist, the person who actually wins, combines both. They have the substance of the lion and the perception management of the fox, and they know when to deploy each one. Here's a scenario you'll recognize. 2 employees, same output, same quality of work. The genius assumes the boss can see his contributions and will reward them appropriately, because that's how a rational system should work. The other person schedules a meeting, brings a 1-page summary of his recent wins, frames every accomplishment in the language of his boss's priorities, not his own, his boss's. And he asks for the raise directly. Who gets it? Every single time. Because the boss, like everyone else, judges more by the eye than by the hand. Your intelligence is worth exactly what other people perceive it to be worth. Not $1 more. Now, if you're still here, if you didn't click away when this started getting uncomfortable, you're not like most people. Most viewers are gone by now. They heard something that challenged the story they tell themselves about why they deserve more than they're getting, and they left. This channel isn't for them. What I'm building here is for people who want to understand how the game actually works, not pretend it doesn't exist. If you want to keep going deeper into this, hit subscribe. I release strategic breakdowns like this regularly, and each one builds on the last. Now let's get into the part that nobody wants to hear. Rules. Intelligent people love rules. Rules are logical. Rules create order. Rules reward the person who understands them best. If you can master the rules, you should win. Here's the problem. The people who are winning aren't playing by the rules. And Machiavelli told you this would happen 500 years ago. Chapter 15. A man who wants to be good in every way among so many who are not good will come to ruin. He's not saying, be evil. Listen carefully. He's saying, understand the terrain you're actually standing on, not the terrain you wish you were standing on. The genius internalizes rules, spoken and unspoken, and then operates within them with extraordinary precision. But the rules themselves are constructs. Someone made them up, and usually the person who made them up benefits from you following them. Here's the paradox that will keep you up tonight. The so-called idiot doesn't break rules strategically, at least not at first. They break rules because they don't know the rules exist. They don't see the invisible boundaries that the genius has internalized so deeply they feel like laws of physics. The idiot goes directly to the CEO because nobody told him he's supposed to go through 3 layers of management first. He pitches an idea that everyone knows won't work because he doesn't know what everyone knows. He applies for a position he's not qualified for because nobody told him he's supposed to wait. And sometimes, often enough to matter, that ignorance of constraints is the only path to breakthrough. Think about Airbnb. When that company started, every smart person in hospitality said it was insane. Strangers sleeping in your house. The liability alone would kill it. Regulation would shut it down. No experienced hotel executive would have proposed it because they knew too much about why it couldn't work. The founders didn't know enough to be stopped by the rules of the industry they were disrupting. Their ignorance of constraints was their competitive advantage. Machiavelli wrote in the Discourses that good or bad fortune depends on whether your methods align with the character of the times. The genius develops methods and sticks to them because the methods are sound. When the times change, and they always change, the genius is still running yesterday's playbook. The adaptable person, the one unattached to any particular approach, shifts with the times. And the genius watches from behind, wondering what happened. I'm not telling you to be stupid. I'm telling you to audit the rules you follow. Ask yourself for each one. Is this a law of physics, or is this a social agreement? If someone made it up, it's negotiable. And the people beating you already know this. Most of the rules smart people follow were designed to keep smart people manageable, productive, compliant, useful to someone else's agenda. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how systems work. Systems reward the behavior that sustains the system. So let me give you something you can actually use. 5 tactical shifts, straight from Machiavelli's playbook, translated into moves you can make this week. First, the 70% rule. Stop waiting for certainty. Machiavelli didn't say the wise man acts with perfect information. He said the wise man does at once what the fool does finally. If you have 70% of what you need to make a decision, move. The other 30% will reveal itself through action. It always does. The genius waits for 95% certainty. By then, the window has closed. Set a 48-hour deadline on any decision you've been sitting on. After 48 hours, act on whatever you know. The cost of being slightly wrong is almost always less than the cost of being perfectly late. Second, the perception audit. Once a week, ask yourself, what do the 5 most important people in my professional and personal life currently believe about me? Not what's true. What they believe, because their beliefs drive their decisions about you, promotions, opportunities, invitations. Trust. If you're brilliant but invisible, you are losing. After your next accomplishment, tell someone about it. Not bragging. Framing. I just solved X, and I think it's going to impact Y. Make your competence visible. The genius waits to be discovered. The strategist makes discovery inevitable. Third, the constraint audit. List the top 5 rules you follow in your career. For each one, ask, is this a law of physics, or is this a social agreement someone else made up? If it's social, it's negotiable. Challenge one this week. Apply for the role you think you're not qualified for. Reach out to the person you think is out of your league. Pitch the idea that's not how things are done here. You will be shocked at how many walls turn out to be curtains. Fourth, the adaptation drill. Machiavelli said, rigidity is the most common path to ruin. Once a month, deliberately change one thing about how you operate. If you're naturally analytical, spend one meeting being purely relational. If you're naturally assertive, spend one conversation being strategically quiet and just observing. Build the muscle that Machiavelli said almost no one builds, the ability to change your nature to match the times. Be the fox when you've been the lion. Be the lion when you've been the fox. Fifth, the first mover practice. When you see an opportunity, give yourself 24 hours to take the first concrete step. Not the best step. The first step. An email, a phone call, a rough draft, a registration form, anything that creates forward momentum. Machiavelli's deepest insight was that action generates information that analysis cannot. You will learn more from one imperfect move than from a month of perfect planning. Make it a rule. When something interesting presents itself, your default is to move toward it, not to study it. Position first, refinement later. Let me leave you with this, and I want you to really hear it, because this is the part most people get wrong about Machiavelli. He didn't write The Prince because he admired ruthless people. He wrote it because he was tired of watching good, intelligent people lose. Machiavelli himself was brilliant. He served Florence for 14 years as a diplomat and political strategist, using his intellect, his analysis, his deep understanding of how power moved through Europe. And then the Medici came back, and he was removed from office, imprisoned, tortured, exiled to a small farm where he spent his days in taverns and his nights writing letters to dead Romans. Not because he wasn't smart enough, because the people who took power from him understood the game he refused to play. That's who the prince is actually written for, not the tyrant, the brilliant person who keeps losing and can't understand why. Machiavelli is grabbing that person by the shoulders and saying, the world does not work the way you want it to. Here is how it actually works. Now, do something with this information. So here's my question for you, and I want you to sit with it after this video ends. Are you going to keep playing the game you think should exist? The one where the best ideas win, where merit is always rewarded, where intelligence is the highest currency? Or are you going to open your eyes and play the game that's actually in front of you? Because the people you call idiots, the ones beating you, they're not idiots. They're people who never had the luxury of believing the comfortable version. They never got to assume the world was fair. They never got to trust that their intelligence alone would carry them. And because they couldn't rely on that comfortable story, they learned to move, to adapt, to manage perception, to act before the window closed. That's not stupidity. That's a different kind of intelligence, the kind Machiavelli spent his whole life trying to teach, and that is why they're ahead. I'll see you in the next one. If any of this landed, if you felt that shift, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is arm the people around you.